Today we're going to be changing the rear motor of an Apollo City. The tools you'll need for this repair are an adjustable wrench, flush cutters, electrical tape, a 4mm Allen key, and a 2.5mm Allen key. The first thing we're going to want to do in our process to replace the rear motor is open up the cavity at the back of the scooter. This is a lot easier to do when the scooter is still upright, so before we flip it over, we're going to take our 2.5mm Allen key and start freeing this cover. Now that the cover's off, you can see inside the cavity. So you can see the cables here. The two up top are for the turn signals in the back, and the two at the bottom, one is for the tail light / brake light, and the other bigger one is the motor cable. Now, to make the change of the cable a lot easier, we're going to want to remove these gaskets on either side of this cavity. So now both gaskets are still attached to the wires, but inside the cavity they're not sealed in their spots. Now we can go ahead and flip the scooter over and proceed. Now we're going to open up the deck to give us access to the motor cable connection to the controller and access to everything we need. So first step in that is removing the kickstand, 4mm Allen key, now we're going to proceed with all these deck screws, still with our 4mm Allen key. Remove the bottom deck plate. We can see the battery, we can see the controller, and all the cables. Now I'm going to unplug the charging cable so I can remove this outer shell and give us some more room. So as you can see, this battery takes up almost all the space inside the deck, so we need to remove it in order to pass a new cable for the motor. So again, with my 4mm Allen key, there are 4 screws holding it down to the deck. Now, because space is so tight in here, we're going to need to pull up these cables. We don't need to disconnect many of them, but we need to pull them up just to get access to the screws securing the battery. Now all the screws are loose. I'm going to disconnect the battery from the controller, and I should, making some clearance with the brake cable, be able to pull it up and remove it. There we go. As you can see, taped up against the side wall of the scooter is all the cables coming from the rear. The thickest one is, of course, the motor cable. If we follow it along, we'll see it's wrapped up in a bunch. And of course, we have our blue, green, and yellow phase wires, as well as our Hall sensor wires. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the shrink wrap so we can disconnect it. And now I'm just going to pull the wire out of the bundle. Move this tape. And now, because we already removed the gaskets earlier, I should be able to simply pull this This is a pretty thick bundle of wires, so to get it through those gaskets, you need to push one connector at a time through. You can't push them all at once. It's going to destroy the gasket. But now we have the cable free, we can continue removing the wheel. So right here, you'll notice there's a small screw just securing the cable in place. We're going to take our 2.5mm Allen key. We don't need to completely remove this screw, we just need to make sure the cable can get free. So now you'll see another cable bundled with this motor cable. That's for the rear tail light. We're not interested in that right now. We don't need to do anything with it. So I'm going to cut these zip ties and anything securing them together. So that I have just the motor cable. And that's all. Now I can start removing the lug nuts, uninstalling the fender, and everything else to remove the wheel completely. Do the same thing on the other side. Now I can take my 2.5mm Allen keys, remove the screws securing the fender. So right here and right here. In the exact same place on the opposite side. I'm going to grab the wrench again and just free up these lock washers. Now we're almost ready to remove the wheel. There's one final step. So we just have to remove the rear brake line from the wheel so we can lift it up, no problem. If your scooter is clean and you've taken good care of it, this should be pretty easy to just move with your hands. This one's very dirty, so it's pretty difficult. I'm going to use a wrench and just start spinning. Now the nut is completely removed. I can pull the brake line. Get the spring, just need to pull this under a bit and remove it. The last thing to do is remove the screw securing the drum brake to the frame of the scooter. So using my 4mm Allen key, just remove that completely. So now we can lift up the wheel. Takes a bit of force. Fender will drop, but it's tethered, that's no problem. You can see our motor and drum brake are completely free. Now the replacement motor assembly, the rear motor assembly, comes with the drum brake, so you don't need to worry about keeping this. All the hardware is always good to keep. So before we can actually install the wheel back in, you need to make sure the rear fender is on and that any spacers that were there before are there again. If you're finding it really tight and you're not able to get the motor into these dropouts here, you can loosen this screw here and pull these swing arms out a little bit, giving you more room, and retighten them. There's no problem doing that. So this is pretty tight. I can see that this isn't quite aligned with where it should be, so I'm just going to grab my wrench, turn it to where it should be, and then I should be able to push it down. So now I can continue with the lock washers. I'm just going to put those finger tight for now until I put in the screws securing the fender here and here on both sides, because the fender may need to wiggle a bit to align properly. Now I can install the screw that secures the drum brake on the drum brake side with my 4mm Allen key. And do the final tightening of the lug nuts. Now the wheel is nice and tight. We can move to the next step of bundling these wires, routing them properly through the frame and into the deck. So the first thing I'm going to do with my motor cable is stick it through this hole here into that empty cavity. Going to reach from the bottom. I'm not going to worry about putting in the gaskets quite yet. I'm just going to make sure it's in and pulled through so that now I can bundle the taillight cable and the motor cable together and hide them properly. So you can use zip ties to do this. That's how it comes from the factory. I'm going to use some electrical tape. It's not too important as long as the cables stay together and that they are tucked away properly. Now there, I can move them as one unit. I'm going to tuck them away in the edge here. Make sure everything's going into that hole as it should be. I might need to turn and move this to make sure that when I tighten this screw in, it's not going into the cables, it's retaining the cables against this piece here. So now I need to put the motor wire cables back through the gaskets. You can see I put some gloves on because this can be a little tough on the skin. I'm going to start with this white connector, the Hall sensor wires, just because it's the biggest and hardest to get through. So we're through the first gasket. Pull this nice and tight. And now we move on to the second gasket, doing the exact same thing. And we're through both gaskets now. So now I'm going to take this bundle of cables that's through both gaskets, and I'm just going to bring it up into here. And there, now our motor cable's in, and we can start connecting it to the controller and putting everything back together. So I'm just going to use some electrical tape to re-secure the wires against the wall of this cavity here. The important thing to remember is we don't want to bunch up the cable like a rope. We want to make it as skinny as we possibly can, so we want them all in a line. So now it's flat. I've got all my wires pulled up as much as I possibly can. I'm going to start sliding in the battery. Now everything's down. Batteries goes in. Seems to be fitting properly. Now I just need to shift it to make sure that the holes in the deck line up with where we screw in the battery. Now that'll be my next step. Using my 4mm Allen key and screwing in the battery. So now we can connect the battery. We're going to cover it with electrical tape, or heat shrink is better. Right now all I have is electrical tape. We're going to make sure this charging port cable remains in its little space right here. And we're going to push all the other wires down into the space here. Now we can close up our deck plate with our 4mm Allen keys. before we start the outer shell. I can plug in the charging port connector, and like everything else, I'm going to cover it with electrical tape. I'm going to keep screwing in the plates. Finish up with our kickstand. Strong. And there we go, we're just about done. There's one more step. So now our last step is to re-put these gaskets into these holes properly so they create the watertight seal we're looking for. So that's almost perfect. One thing that I can't show you today because we don't have the power outlets here available is that we would typically apply hot glue inside this cavity around those gaskets to just 100% ensure that the water resistance remains intact. Obviously these gaskets get beat up a lot. It's pretty much impossible to do this repair without compromising them in some way. So as an extra layer of protection, we like to apply the hot glue just to be safe. Okay, so now we can finish up by putting the cover here, 2.5mm Allen key. It's important that this is nice and strong. And then we can roll our grip tape back up, give it a good push, and make sure it stays. And we just changed the rear motor of an Apollo City.